just graduated?
I have one just graduated, I have a junior,
yeah.
and I have a
Just so you
seventh
know, Gary,
grader.
just give me a number.
So I am
I'm gonna go.
still busy,
Okay.
and I'm annoyed with my graduate because he's working tonight
Okay,
to tell us. So I'm
we
like,
want to welcome everybody to our board meeting this evening and begin with the superintendent's report.
Well, thank you, Skip. Hello, everybody in the audience, and hello to everybody out on the live feed watching tonight's meeting. We appreciate that you are spending some time with us this evening. I'd like to start out under the recognitions. I'd like to introduce Allison Dygert, who was selected as our new Vicksburg Middle School principal. And just wanted to go over the process with everybody real quick. We put together a committee. There was 9 of us selected. We had administration and teaching staff from the middle school, and we selected 5 candidates to interview. We had a very strong field, and in the end, we selected Allison as our choice, and we are very excited. Allison comes back to Vicksburg Community Schools. If you recall, she started her education career in Vicksburg in 2005, and I believe student taught with Amy. Is that correct? Yeah. And so Allison was with us for 11 years in a variety of roles: teacher, academic coach, instructional consultant, lots of leadership positions. She's been a principal for the past 6 years, and we're very excited to have Allison coming in a couple of weeks. So Allison, if you can stand up and be recognized and do a little introduction here.
Thank you. Yes, like Mr. O'Neill said, I've been an administrator the last 6 years. Coming back to Vicksburg has always been a dream, and so I'm so thankful to be back and grateful for this opportunity to serve the community again. So thank you very much. I do have 2 children in the district as well. Sydney Taylor is in 10th grade, and Lincoln Taylor is in 7th grade, so I get to be in the building with him and skip down the halls with our arms linked, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So yes, I'm very excited to be back. Thank you.
Welcome home.
Yes, and I also brought along my husband, Bill Dygert, so thank you.
Well, welcome back. We're super excited for your leadership and looking forward to great things. And it was really nice to meet you too, Bill. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm going to jump right into the legislative report. I attached many documents inside the agenda for you to review, but I think the one that we're just going to talk about is on February 9th, Governor Whitmer released her budget. And it was bold and big, and we have a long way to go, but if we go back all the years that we've talked about the School Finance Research Collaborative, this budget really, truly represents those recommendations. So overall, we're looking for a K-12 budget that she presented of $18.4 billion. That would be the highest investment in public education in Michigan in more than 20 years. Just some quick highlights: $580 million towards the foundation allowance. That's a 5% overall increase. And if you recall, this year there was some discussion that we finally hit what Proposal A was supposed to be, and that's all districts getting the same foundation. So it'd be a 5% increase. That would go up to $9,135. Looking at $222 million for at-risk funding, $150 million increase for special ed reimbursement rates, and $30.8 million increase in funding for career and tech ed. And I just wanted to highlight a couple more. You've probably heard about the teacher shortage that's been going on across the nation. Of course, Michigan is seeing the same. She has called for $450 million investment in new educator recruitment programs, as well as a whopping $1.5 billion for retention bonuses for teachers and staff in their first 4 years. There's many items that need to be worked out in this proposal, but it's, in my opinion, a wonderful thing to hopefully recruit and retain more teachers. Some other highlights of her budget: monies for school and student wellness, for their well-being, school safety, early childhood, and also some MIPSER's considerations as well. As always, the governor's proposal is the first concrete step towards a budget agreement. We know there's a long way to go. The House and the Senate will release their versions in the future, probably around April. And then hopefully we'll have this budget somewhat moving in the right direction around May, and hopefully with a mid-June adoption. It would be very nice if we had this done before the July 1. And Steve, if there's anything you'd like to add about Governor Whitmer's proposal at this time?
No, I think you covered it really well. A lot will depend on, again, the House and Senate. And, you know, the numbers look fantastic, but it's way too early to start planning on those numbers, because I know that the legislature will have some different ideas. It'll be important to see how the May revenue consensus meeting goes, and it's unlikely we'll see any real concrete steps to wrap things up until that happens. And hopefully we continue to see strong revenue growth the way we did in the January consensus. So stay tuned.
Back in the early 90s, when we passed Proposal A, I sure didn't think it would take us 30 years to catch up.
Yeah. And again, I think the highlight of this budget are the layers of money, the categorical. I think that's going to be very important, and I really hope that gets pushed through. Again, this proposal, it's large, it's ambitious, lots of new initiatives proposed. So looking forward to hearing how the legislators work through this. And again, I think the most important thing that I'm going to repeat it. This continues to incorporate the elements of the weighted formulas. Again, those are recommended by the School Finance Research Collaborative, which we've talked about quite a bit in the past. Also, in your packet, just wanted to highlight some important dates that are coming up. We have some concerts coming up in February. Both the middle school and the high school pre-festival band concerts will be taking place starting tomorrow. So come on out and enjoy some talented students playing some great music. And just a reminder, next Friday, the 25th, is a midwinter break day, no school for students and staff. And then March, the musical season kicks off with SpongeBob. Hearing great things about that, so plan accordingly. And we also have a student half day on the 11th. And with that, Skip, that's my report.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, we'll go on to the budget and finance report, Steve.
Okay, I've got 2 items to discuss this evening. I'll try to move through them fairly quickly. First item being the monthly budget progress report for the 7 months ended January 31st. And taking a look on the revenue side, you can see that on a year-to-date basis, we're at not quite 12.5 million. We're about just under 43% of the originally adopted budget. All right, on the expenditure side, total instructional expenditures totaled 8.3 million. Support services are at 6.2 million. And then you can see the breakdown for athletics, community services, and interfund transfers. So total expenditures year to date are just under 15.1 million. One thing I'd like to point out, we have about just over 1 million, or about 1,005,000 of expenditures that we anticipate being eligible for reimbursement through federal dollars. And so it'll take some time for that process to complete and for those dollars to come in. But when you look at the difference, you know, the year-to-date deficiency of 2.6 million, just recognize that about 1 million of that we anticipate being reimbursed for. Okay. Second page of the report shows expenditures by object code, and salaries and benefits obviously are #1 expenditure, as you would expect, and as you see typically in K-12 schools. So salaries and benefits totaled just under 11.8 million. And then you can see purchase services just under 1.5 million, supplies at just under 1.1 million, capital outlay at 626,000, other expenditures at 100,000. So again, we're just about around 15.1 million on a year-to-date basis. Any questions on that? Okay.
Going
If
too
not,
easy on you.
I know, I appreciate it. Second item, included in the board packet, there's a memo explaining the process for issuing Series 2 of the 2020 bonds. So these are the bonds that Voters approved back in May of 2020. Total bond issue approved was $41.75 million. And as we have done for a while now, we are spacing out the issuances to coincide with when the work is going to be done. So we issued Series 1 in 2020 that totaled right around $17.5 million. Series 2 will be $14.5 million. Typically, in the past, we have typically issued bonds, in the May, June timeframe, and with a closing right around the end of the fiscal year. But, given the current rate where we see interest rates rising, and I would fully expect the Federal Reserve to implement one rate increase before these bonds are issued. But we think there are going to be several additional rate increases throughout the year. So we're trying to move this along as quickly as possible. So we're asking the board tonight to approve the bond authorizing resolution. It's just the first step in that process. The memo lays out the timeline. So just with kind of the major milestones, assuming the authorizing resolution is ratified this evening, there'll be a lot of work behind the scenes to create bond or the official statement for the bonds, which is how it's marketed, bond ratings, all that work that goes into issuing millions of dollars in securities will take place. And then we would schedule the actual bond sale on March 31st. All right. And I'd like to point out that there's a couple ways to go about selling bonds. Some districts or some entities will enter into a negotiated sale with a bond underwriter. Other districts, including Vicksburg, will typically do a competitive sale. And there will be publication, it will invite bids, we'll get bids from all over. We just find that is the most transparent, the most cost-effective way. We have always had great interest from lenders, and so we will anticipate continuing with that strategy. All right, so bond sale will take place, or the bids will be received on March 31st, and then we'll wait to the regular April board meeting on April 11th, where the board would then approve the bid, whoever the low bid is at that time, and then we would anticipate a final closing date of April 25th. So bond proceeds would be wired into our construction account on that date. And then we'll be ready to go for summertime. All right, any questions on that?
Steve, maybe I'm demonstrating my ignorance, but your third group of bond is going to be the largest, if I did my math correctly. If interest rates are going up, why wouldn't we make a larger sale of bonds at a lower interest rate now and smaller later? Or do we have to have pay as we go and we can't bank that money? I mean,
we do have that. We have the ability to sequence those bonds out, but from my perspective and in talking to the financial advisors, there's so much work that won't happen for several years that we may have a higher interest rate, but we will just pay interest for a couple years on those bonds if they're issued, but the proceeds aren't being used for the construction. Now, we earn some investment income, but typically that, you may or may not recoup. You can try to think the best way to say this, but right now, currently, the investment rates, so when we invest the proceeds, the rates are very, very low. Now, those will start to come up as well, but we don't want to just have an excess amount of proceeds sitting in a bank account and paying interest on those bonds longer than we have to.
okay, thank you.
Isn't there some federal ramification too? With regard to the earnings?
You can get into an arbitrage
Yes.
situation, and with rates increasing, and on the 2020 series, I don't anticipate any arbitrage issues. Depending on how the proceeds are invested, we may run into a situation where we would owe an arbitrage rebate back to the federal government. And we'll talk more about that if and when it becomes an issue, but I'd like to, think our financial advisors, bond counsel would all say that having an arbitrage rebate or paying money back to the federal government because you earn too much interest is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. You at least know that you have earned the maximum amount of investment income that you can. Where I think it becomes a problem for districts is if they don't recognize that that liability is coming due and they spend those proceeds, and then sometimes those arbitrage rebates can be huge.
I wasn't so much concerned about the arbitrage on these two issues. It's just if we were to try and rush into that thing and then just have the money sitting around, I could see that maybe throwing us in an arbitrage situation. And the rules have changed. When Larry Cole was superintendent, we invested that money and put it in, and we were in about a 9% environment at that point in time, and it paid for this auditorium, the earnings, but we didn't have to deal with arbitrage in that situation.
Right. So, all right, any other questions? All right, if not, then that'll conclude my report. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, section 98B, goal progress reports. Gail, and stay seated or be comfortable. Gail hurt her ankle today, so.
Yep. All right, yes, so I am here. I have the pleasure of presenting our Section 98B goal progress reports. So I'm not going to read through the notes that I know that Kevin passed on to you, but I just wanted to highlight a few things in each section. So back in late August, we became aware that the Public Act 48, Section 98B had been passed, and it required 4 different things of school districts. That we establish our educational goals, which were aligned to our continuity of learning plan a year ago. And so we did that and posted them. They had to be developed by school. And then we also had to report out in February and then at the end of the school year on the progress of those goals based on the benchmark assessments that we use. We have to disaggregate that data by grade level, demographic, and by students' format of instruction. For us, the format of instruction did not make a difference because we only had a few people or a few students who participated in virtual learning this school year. So those were the 4 requirements that we learned about. And I wanted to make sure that you understood what the data is that you're looking at too. The way that our goals were set, we decided to use scaled scores to mark progress. So there were 2 ways that a student could meet our goal. So we have a whole master list of all the students who took the assessment, and we looked at did their scaled score, which is just based on the number of questions and the difficulty of the questions. It's calculated right within the test. Did the students show any progress from fall to winter in their scaled score? If they did, then they counted as met the goal. If they stayed the same or decreased, then they were counted as not met the goal. And then the other criteria was whether or not they were at benchmark or achieved benchmark, which is also set by the Renaissance Star Math and Star Reading and varies by grade level and assessment. So those were the 2 ways that we took all of our students who in K-8, so the high school level, we were not required to aggregate and disaggregate the data like that, just the K-8. So we made a master list of all the students and just did some formatting in a spreadsheet and came up with the data that we reported. I think that for the most part, that data will be very valuable in instructional planning. It's important to know that we also look at other types of data, more trend data and data that compares our students to other students nationally, not just a student by themselves, whether or not they moved up a point on the scaled score. So any questions on either the background or the scores that we use, how we get those? Dr. Schremer?
Are these tests that we've already been using for other
Yes.
purposes, so we didn't have to, again, reinvent the wheel?
No, these are the ones that we have been using, since I started at least. The Renaissance Learning, they're the ones that we do look at, usually trend data 3 years back, look at their growth rates and percentile ranks.
Now, is this data useful sort of in real time to teachers to understand where weaknesses are so that they can respond in a way, say, oh, they don't get this, so I've got to go back and teach that?
At the
so that I can-
classroom level, exactly. So the data that came out of this requirement really is helpful at the classroom level for the teachers to look at and adjust their instruction based on who improved and what areas do we need to work on to make sure that all students are making progress toward the goals.
And am I right in assuming that the one goal is meeting the benchmark? But if you don't meet the benchmark, if you improve at all, which would be one scale score,
Yes. But that,
you meet.
and I will say, our goal, unlike others that I've looked at, are all students. So we didn't say 80% of the students, we said all students will increase and/or achieve benchmark.
Are these tests the kids are already taking for other reasons?
Yes, we take the
Okay, so we weren't
assessment.
adding extra
No.
testing.
No, and it's really a part of, so 104A of the same 48 section, Public Act 48, talks about the benchmark assessments that are required to be administered. So we are required to administer assessments in K-8, a benchmark assessment, either one that's commercially available or one that we make up ourselves. And so we have been using Star Reading and Star Math, and so we just continued to use Star Reading and Star Math.
So if we've been using the test before, do we have some historical data to compare? Because I'm quite certain the last 2 years,
Yes.
our progress is not going to be what it had been for all the reasons we all know. But do we have that historical data to compare to, and have we
We
done
do,
that?
and we look at that 3 times a year as a district. So we do district-level data reviews 3 times a year, and then building data reviews. And unfortunately, our district data review was scheduled for one of our snow days, so we didn't get to do that in February. But our schools did do the building data review last Friday. Started it on Friday afternoon when we have our curriculum work and PLC afternoon. That's the purpose of that, is to operate as a professional learning community. And then next Wednesday afternoon is our School Improvement Wednesday, and they'll continue the analysis and action planning. So there's a format that we use similar to looking at the highs and the lows, and then looking at how do we sustain the areas in which we're making good progress and we're seeing good performance, and what do we need to do differently. And we look at different causal factors. Is it, what, as a teacher, can I do differently? What conditions in the learning environment can I change to get a different result or keep doing? So there are different areas. It's a structured format. We call it the Collaborative Learning Cycle Workbook, so CLC workbook, and it's a process, well-known process that we've been using for.
Because I just am curious what you perceive the impact of very disruptive school years has been in real terms, and where you are seeing the greatest impact and where we need to respond. I'm not at all interested in pointing fingers and placing blame.
Right.
If we don't know how big the problem is, then we don't know how, what we really need to do to respond and fix it.
That's correct.
And I'm hoping this is not just more data, but it's useful data.
Correct,
Yeah.
yes. And it's, I would say, like, each set of data is useful in its own way. So the data that we collected for this progress report is really helpful at the individual classroom level, because it's done by the student level. So in the pivot tables that we pulled together, teachers can click on each of those categories, and there are the students, who made what progress, and make adjustments in their instruction. The percentile ranks that we look at 3 times a year, that's the trend data. And so that is really more informative of our units or even our curriculum. So if we tend to continue to see issues across the board along with our MSTEP, that's one of the reasons why we changed the 8th grade math, because we continue to see MSTEP scores and STAR scores that were not where we wanted them to be. And so we did the course design review process to identify a new resource to help us get in a better way. So if you look at, when we looked at our STAR scores, the percentile ranks, our at or above category went up at every grade level except in 8th grade. And so that continues to be an area that we need to give attention to. Some of the thoughts that we have are students by middle school and 8th grade in particular are tired of taking the STAR test. And so yes.
My daughter has complained.
So, is it incentives? Well, we've tried some incentives to for progress, but they just, I'm getting together with a rep who has some benchmark assessments that are aligned to PSAT and SAT. And is that something that we might want to start transitioning at least our 8th graders to prepare them for the PSAT and to give them a different test so that it's not the STAR test that they've taken since kindergarten. So that's one thing. But also just looking at how do we structure our classes. We know that particularly the middle school was impacted by the quarantines and the isolations. Middle school students, if they're at home and no one's there, even if there is someone there, they're less likely to do their work than elementary students who their parents are there, and high school students who need to earn the credit. So those are things that we need to look at the impact of on our middle school data. Because when you look at our middle school data, we had some highs, but it was where we had most of our lows. When we look at the data, particularly this data, like I said, our STAR data, the at or above proficiency went up across the board except in 8th grade. Our subgroup population, we disaggregate for those demographics all the time, not just for this report. As a part of our data reviews, we're looking at our economically disadvantaged, we're looking at our students with IEPs, and we're looking at our English learners to see how are those subgroups improving and how do we support. We look at, actually in the data that we compare the subpopulation, so students with IEPs compared to the students without IEPs, because you can't compare students with IEPs to all students because those students are in that one. So you want to get the two groups and see, are we closing that gap? And that's part of the collaborative learning cycle that we do, is we look at, are those subgroups closing? Are we making, in fact, our goals, aside from this goal report, have a higher expectation for our subgroups to grow than our all students, because we know if we move those subgroups, then we're going to move our all students.
How do we track subjects other than ELA and math?
So like in my response to our data,
similar? Do we have anything similar, or do we have, is there a plan to, what about social studies? What about science?
we use our curriculum assessments for one, so that we're not adding more assessments to the kids. And so our grade level teams and our department teams meet regularly to look at our formative assessments and our summative assessments, and they disaggregate that data. So at grade level, we call those collaborative teacher teams, and they meet sometimes weekly, and just to respond to their formative and summative assessment. Our department teams also, I know that many of them meet weekly after school or during a common planning period to review their assessments and then come together, and they, when I see that something Kevin is doing is working well and his class is outperforming my class, we talk about what's he doing that I could be doing too. So those are our collaborative teacher teams that we have getting back up and running in our district. But so for the science and social studies, the fine arts, the world language, those assessments and student performance on that is really from our curriculum resources. But there is a formal process for analyzing it.
Am I remembering correctly that we've gone through various iterations of testing at the high school level and had a similar problem where kids weren't engaged. They're taking, I forgot, that math, they had different levels of tests. And for some kids, it's like, oh, really? You know, I got one more thing. And it seems to me, if I recall correctly, that when we used a test that they had to take for college entrance, suddenly we become interested.
Yeah.
And performance improves. So if you find a test that is serving the student's interest as well as a diagnostic for the school,
Yes.
you know, like a PSAT or something where they kind of know where they stand and what they can think about, and what they need to work on, so that if they want to go to
Right.
a
And that's
certain
why
school or a certain career, what they've got to work on.
we're interested in benchmark assessments that
Yeah,
are
so you
coming
have
out.
an intrinsic motivation rather than, you know, the usual middle school motivation, here's some sugar if you hit, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Gail, I had a question.
Yeah.
Dave kind of reminded me of it. Look, when we come to conferences and we get those printouts of the STAR test and then the test also, that shows where our student is, if they're at grade level, above grade level, below grade level.
Some diamonds and, yep.
Right, and I remember asking, I think I've asked the last couple years, the teachers, can we see the progression from the years before? So when they print those out for us, is there a way to get, like I have a fifth grader, how he increased from kindergarten through fifth grade to see where he made more leaps, less leaps, or is it not possible because it's by grade level each time they take the test each year? So like looking at fourth grade data versus fifth grade data would not necessarily help.
Not
us.
necessarily, especially when you're looking at scaled scores, that changes from year to year. But I know there's a multi-year report that we as a district can see, but I don't remember if it's by
I don't
student.
think the teachers can see it from the year before. 'cause I think
Okay,
I've asked
by
them.
individual student.
Correct, I think.
Yeah, let me look into that.
I just,
Yeah.
it's something that we've always been interested in when we go to the conferences to see what the progression was and if there were certain years where they struggled more or less but I know the curriculum changes also. They're learning different things in different years and sometimes that.
It might be more of a composite report that I'm thinking of, you know, one that is not an individual student, but rather just, you can click on it to get down to the individual student, but I'm not sure if it's a master report like that. But I'll check on it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Gail?
All right.
Rest your foot.
Yeah.
Okay, we come to the audience portion of our meeting. Carrie Garman wishes to address the board.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. My name is Carrie Garman, mother of two terrific Toby Tigers. So I'd like to ask the audience first, who's been a part of a governing board, advisory board, nonprofit? Any hands? No? Okay, so I know it's a tough job. My favorite part, though, is engaging with the people that I represent, listening to their views, discussing different ideas that they have. One of the excerpts I pulled from the philosophy of this board is that they affirm that they intend to act as a truly representative body for citizens in all matters related to pub programs and operations. I feel that a truly representative body would create a culture of responding to all concerns brought to the attention of the board. They would make an effort to engage and understand those concerns. I've reached out multiple times to members of the board, and I've received just one response. Thank you very much, Stephanie. My husband and I chose to move to Vicksburg just over a year ago because we heard that the schools were fantastic. Opportunities for our kids were pretty much endless. On the VCS website, choosing Vicksburg schools, the top expectation listed is a safe, caring, and nurturing environment. In this COVID pandemic world we all live in, safe is what we make of it. And the safety of all students and staff should be based on science and not personal politics. My children know why they've received 2 COVID vaccines, why they wear masks in school and in public, to protect everyone, not just themselves. They choose to do these things because we've empowered them with that information. They have an uncle who's physically disabled. He's respiratory compromised. He's just one of the billions of humans that we want to protect. The lessons that our kids learn now about respect for others, all others, might be difficult lessons, but those that they'll carry with them for the rest of their lives. All we've asked is for a simple mask, a district-wide universal masking policy. It has made a difference elsewhere in reducing transmission of COVID and other infectious diseases. It can do the same here. So please review the pure scientific, peer-reviewed data. Make a truly informed decision with the data from the experts, just as you would when you make a decision to have a snow day. We want our schools to remain open safely so our kids can get the great education offered in this school. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Kelly?
My name is Kelly McDonald. I'm the president of the Vicksburg Education Association, speaking on behalf of our fine teachers this evening. Jennifer, to answer your question, there is such a report. It's called the test record, test history, and I can't speak to how long we got a ring there. How long the full K... I can't speak to how long that's been available, but I know I personally noticed it this school year for the first time, that I could pull up my third grade students' full STAR test history, and going all the way back to kindergarten when students are taking the STAR early literacy test, and I could see when they transitioned to the STAR test, so I would absolutely ask to see that. It's really interesting data, and it certainly drills down to your individual student, and it helps. It does help show which year they've had the most growth, and I think that a lot of teachers would agree that, especially in those early elementary years, we see growth by leaps and bounds, and then as we get into upper L, we start to see a little more plateauing, and then a spike, and then, we just introduce our skills in a different way. So
Thank you.
I just thought that would be helpful. It's a great thing to look at. The teachers really appreciate the robust discussion that the board has had at the special meeting about social emotional learning, and tonight about our high stakes assessments that our kids are experiencing. I would reiterate what I said at the special board meeting. There's just so much that you can see and come be a part of. I know you were being very respectful of the safety concerns that teachers had about extra bodies in the classrooms and in the building. I think if we, started a conversation about how that could be done, possibly masked, I think there'd be a lot of people who would be interested in helping you gain access to seeing what the testing environment is like for our students, especially K-8. We have 5 testing windows in which these kiddos are taking these assessments that are quite long, and they're on the computer to prepare them for that digital M-STEP format. And I just think it'd be a really great experience for you to see what that looks like. If you figure 5 testing windows by the time a student's a 5th grader, we're looking at 25 big opportunities to take this test. Then we have kids who are ready for it in kindergarten, and we also have kids who we progress monitor. So we keep an extra close eye on their growth because maybe it's not quite at benchmark. So that's taking math and reading STAR tests additional times throughout the year. So I certainly can see what we mean by the time we're in 8th grade, we're starting to fatigue a little bit on the format. So I just offer to be a part of helping you see that. We certainly don't want any testing irregularities where we're having a conversation while a kid's taking their test, but I'm certain we could work hard to figure out a way that you could see that along with the social emotional learning components we were talking about last month. So the door's always open, and school just looks so much different than even when I was here as a Toby Tiger myself. So it's hard to imagine what it's like for these kids until you actually see it. And I know that hasn't been available to you the last few years, but I appreciate, and the teachers appreciate your conversation around it. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Does anyone else wish to address the board on a non-agenda item? If you could state your name and address, please, because you haven't signed on the sheet.
My name's John Eiler. Sorry, I was a few minutes late. I didn't get the sign-in sheet. So I am the parent of 3 elementary kids that used to go to Vicksburg schools. We decided to pull ours out because we did not feel progress was being made. In talking to one of our kids, the conversation was about science. And one of them said, our teacher said she'd love to do more science, but there's no supplies, there's no equipment. I understand this is elementary school, but, you know, supplies to do basic science can't be that expensive, right? I mean, seems like that's something that could be doable. The school is, as I understand, going to receive about $1.5 million extra dollars for COVID relief funds. Any chance any of that could be put into science? I think that's a pretty important topic. I'm also a little concerned that I haven't heard, and tonight was the first time I heard a little bit, and I still don't understand, but all of the testing is on math and English. What about science? At what point does that become important? I think that's important at the earliest age. I don't blame the teachers. Most of our teachers have really been pretty great. Mrs. McCaw's been great, but they were in a bad situation. So speaking of the bad situation, let's compare to Comstock schools. They were about 2/3 the size of Vicksburg. They had 1/8 of the COVID cases. We had 533 to date. They've got 62. We have 8.5 times as many COVID cases as Comstock schools. The number of staff out testing positive. We have 75 to date, they have 19. 4 times the number of staff out with COVID as Comstock schools. Surely something better could be done. There's nothing special about Vicksburg, right? Vicksburg isn't like somehow COVID's only attracted to Vicksburg and not Comstock, right? People are people, right? It's contagious, anyone can get it. They're doing something drastically different than we are, and it pays off. They don't have the constant rotating of kids in and out of the classroom, or half the class is missing, like happened in our kids' classes. They didn't have substitutes in and out, and every time that happens, we all know there's learning loss. They didn't have staff members stepping in instead of qualified substitutes, because they didn't have the number of cases. The difference is they've had mandatory masks and they've enforced it from day one. We all know the science is so clear on this.
John, you've got about 20 seconds.
Thank you. Hopefully, we've turned the corner, but unfortunately, history has shown that, you know, we don't know. We don't know what the future brings. But I would like to see some movement on this, some policy. If that many kids were out sick with the regular seasonal flu, something would be done. But we just chose to do nothing, and the learning losses, the test scores, everything, there are consequences to it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? Okay, we'll go on to board action required. First item we have before us is approval of the January 10th, 2022 regular board meeting minutes.
Move approval.
Moved by Carol,
Support.
supported by Tina. Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of general fund invoices totaling $274,753.74.
I move approval.
Moved by Tina,
Support.
supported by Jennifer. Discussion? Stephanie?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of purchase card disbursements for December 2021 totaling $101,796.25.
So move.
Moved by Carol,
I'll support it.
supported by Dave. Discussion? Stephanie?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of Series 2 bond authorizing resolution.
Move approval.
Moved by Tina,
Support.
supported by Dave. Discussion?
I just want to say I'm really pleased with the planning for the bond originally and the whole format of that, allowing us to do technology and other things. And I really appreciate your efforts, Steve, in answering simple questions from simple people. Thank you.
You know, I just want to thank Steve for coming up with this stair-step bond program.
We'll have to start thinking about 2026.
So-
I put in the memo, so
But
around
it-
2024, we'll be planning for the next one.
You had a great idea there, and it's worked well for the district. Any other discussion? Stephanie?
Oh, yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And yes, motion carries. Approval of 8th grade trip to Cedar Point on Monday, June 13th, 2022. All expenses to be paid by the student. That must mean we're on the downhill side, guys.
The hard part is voting on that
Yeah.
now, when we've been doing this sine wave of disease over the years. I hope to God we're done with this, but, I mean, that's my only problem voting on it now. You know, if it's next month and our numbers look great, more power to them. I think we didn't approve it last year because the numbers were so high.
We didn't, you're correct.
And, you know, I don't know what's going to happen between now and June 13th.
Didn't we have like a threshold date last year where we were like, okay, when is the absolute decision?
I'm going to have Dennis come down. I mean, I know for the planning purposes, for the charter buses and all of
Right.
those things, we have to start getting deposits. Dennis, is there any timeline that you can share?
So we could definitely back out of the reservation on trailways, on Indian trailways. We've already reached out to them, and they didn't require down payment. They understand the culture that we're living in right now, where, a lot of trips are being questioned or, kind of waiting to see what happens. So I will say we can back out of that. By March, though, we need to be reaching out to Cedar Point to secure those, to get orders, for tickets and things like that. We thought put it on this month, but knowing that we didn't want to wait until March and then come back and try to secure the reservation of the Indian Trails. We felt like this would be the appropriate time to do that because we didn't want to tie up buses for them if you weren't interested in approving that.
And this is only the 8th graders who can afford to go.
Yeah, so, and we do say that in there that, it is funded by the 8th graders and the 8th grade families, but we do cover, we make scholarships available for kids.
So-
If they want to go, we
Okay.
make sure they can go.
But there will be kids that will be staying back, potentially.
Yeah,
Okay.
not all students go, and there are some that choose not, they just don't
Right.
want to go.
So is it possible to do like a test before you go?
Are you asking Dr. Schremer?
I'm asking anybody. As an option?
Well, I think what you're looking for tonight is just a feel for where we are, or maybe a first reading approval, so you can make your contact with Indian Trails, which if I'm understanding you correct, we can get back out of. And then we can revisit again next month. Maybe we could do it as a second
A
reading or
little
something.
bit more detail on the
Well, and
protocol?
we know where the next 4 weeks are ending up anyway.
But we haven't hit spring break yet, so.
No, we haven't. And, I guess I'd be interested too about once we make that commitment with Cedar Point, do we have any wiggle room or anything in that situation, so.
Is it Cedar Point just the tickets, or is there like special reservations that Cedar Point has because they're limiting capacity?
It's the tickets.
Okay.
That would be we have to commit to the tickets. But, again, we
Right.
We've dealt with them for a number of years, and we just felt like, you know, we would get that on the books to make sure that we had transportation, because that's usually the biggest, you know, ensuring that our work is get across.
We're all about fun up here. But I think if I'm a parent of a middle school kid, I have lots of questions, you know, about protocols that you're going to be able to do, and questions like Jennifer asked, you know, because that may make a big difference in your participation, and so I think you're going to have to think that through, because parents may decide, I don't want to do that.
And do you have a situation where if your student numbers did drop to a certain level, would Indian Trail still, I mean, would they drive 10 kids to Cedar Point? Or do we know that?
If we get down to 10, I think we're gonna probably have to call it up. You know, I mean, we just probably take a trip.
Mm-hmm, okay.
So, but they would be flexible in terms of the number of buses.
How many buses do we usually take? 2, 3?
Has there been any interest in trying to stay a little more local and doing Michigan Adventure? I mean, would that make it easier because it's not as far, or is that not going to really matter?
I don't know if that would necessarily matter. I mean, you'd essentially be going through the same, you know, you'd be on a bus,
Right.
traveling together for, you know, an extended.
I just didn't like their ticket requirements, so that if they were a little bit more flexible than, say, Cedar Point.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, that's fine.
That's a long tradition, we're going to Cedar Point.
Oh, it is a long tradition.
That would be hard, because I know the kids, they do enjoy and look forward to that trip, so.
I would propose maybe we do a first reading type motion on it, and then maybe Dennis, that'd let you at least get a hold of the trailways if the board chooses to do that. And also maybe get some information from Cedar Point about what happens if cases are rising and we're in a situation there with regard to the tickets and refunding and some of those things. I know with that, I don't know how the board feels about that, but
About approving a first reading and then not actually approving the trip until we read it again?
yeah, we could do a second reading next month.
I'm in support of that.
Okay, you want to make that motion then, Tina?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
make that motion. I'll support.
Okay, we got a support by Carol then. Discussion?
Yeah, I think you need feedback from parents of the middle school about what they're going to be comfortable with. You know, I think you need to talk to them about that, because if numbers start coming up, you know, what do we have in place? I mean, we have done, I think Jennifer's question is very good. I mean, when we've done it for musicals and different productions where we didn't want the whole cast to go down, and they were tested when they're rehearsing so that they could do that. You know, is that something that we want to do? So I think it's worth talking about it now.
Any other discussion? Okay, we've got a motion and a support. Again, this would be a first reading with a update report back in March, and that gives us a chance, I think, to do a little bit more research and stuff and get some answers. And that would be the approval at that time or a further extension at that time. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of following administrator contract upon results of state and federal unprofessional conduct check, and that's Allison Dygert, Vicksburg Middle School Principal.
So moved.
Moved by Tina,
Support.
supported by Carol. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations again. And on that, we'll stand adjourned.